we need this time alone to integrate, to process life, to have insights, to think about what we want to do, to connect to our authentic, unique being, right? Solitude is literally the fertile ground for growth. Solitude is literally the arena for, genius, right? It's the arena for insight. We find more and more peace in that just beingness, that just sitting there, right? And this allows us to then go back into the world and interact and socialize from a place of, I'm good, I'm whole, I can actually love from this place. Like, I don't need anything from other people, right? And really the deepest, most satisfying insights you're going to have, the most beautiful moments in life that you're going to have, at least in my opinion, some of the most beautiful moments of my life have been in solitude. The deepest realizations I've had, the deepest insights, the most beautiful moments have been in moments where I'm just alone with myself and just reflecting on life and integrating life and just being. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lion's Heart. And in this video, we're going to be discussing the importance of solitude on the path to greatness, self-actualization, awakening, and becoming your true and authentic self, right? So before we begin, I just want to emphasize what actually got me into spirituality, what really roped me in the first place, and I think many others as well, was this idea of, I remember shuffling through books, shuffling through magazines, and there's this image of the Buddha. There's this you get this typical image of the Buddha or like some monk meditating or something like that. And it brings to mind this image of just being completely happy and content with nothing else besides just being, just sitting there and being able to find that content and happiness and satisfaction within yourself. And to me, this was like such a liberating image. This was such a liberating idea. It was like a 10,000 pound weight just dropped from my shoulders when I realized there was people doing this and that this was an actual possibility. I mean, of course there was skepticism, but I was like kind of looking at all these people meditating, and there was just something deeper in it that kind of touched me. It was like, I think this is true. I think that there's truth in this. And I just had this, I fell in love with this idea of like, can I really just be happy alone? Can I really just find that peace within and not need to constantly externalize my happiness, not constantly need to distract myself and, go through these different habits and addictions that just kind of are stimulating me and keeping me, away from facing myself, right? And I think if we look around in society today, and for most of history, humans have always been kind of, you could say, drowning or lost in this external seeking for happiness, this external seeking for pleasure, right? Whether it's through video games or different types of food or vacations or romance and partnerships and online, adult content or scrolling on the phone or video games. Basically, what we see here is an endless supply of distraction. We see an endless supply of external, stimulants and external triggers and things like that keep us kind of away from ourselves and keep us away from facing and being with ourselves, right? I think that this is nothing new. Of course, nowadays we have almost an endless supply of it, but I still think this is nothing new. Humans have always had trouble sitting with themselves and being with themselves in silence. And I think one of the earliest forms of this, before video games and online content and, TV and stuff like that, has been socializing. Even before books, even before reading, it's been socializing. It's been these social structures, these social games we play, the social hierarchy, meeting other people and kind of using that as a way to feel less alone, right? To connect with something outside of ourselves. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I think socializing is beautiful and it's definitely an important aspect of being human. And we can learn so much from each other, and we can gain so much joy and satisfaction from interacting with each other. It's just when it's used as a crutch to not be with ourselves and to not come into a place of solitude and, self-reflection, that I believe it becomes harmful. And let's just quickly unpack what socialization actually is. Let's just kind of contemplate that together. So if we look at socialization, objectively, what really is socializing? Because, if you go into a bar, let's say you go into a bar and you look around and you see people chatting and talking, and there's all these dynamics and there's all these things going on. If you were looking at that from the perspective of like a bird, right? Or an ant, you would look at that and it just wouldn't make much sense. It would kind of seem like not much is happening, right? It's just some noises, there's people moving around, there's there's just a bunch of noise happening. Yet if you go inside the minds of these people, there's a whole world that is existing there, right? There's a whole illusory world of hierarchy and status and dynamics and betrayal and friendship and allies and who's that and who's this, and like it's a whole illusory world, right? So we have to acknowledge that the social domain is illusory. It's completely made up. Yet we also carry so much importance to this domain. This domain is so we put so much time and effort into creating our character, into honing our personality, and really like adjusting how we show up socially. And we put so much effort and time into this kind of made up game that humans have created, which is the social domain, right? It doesn't actually exist in objective reality. It's more in the minds of the people that are partaking in it, right? And this isn't just like a cute, fun little thing that's happening. This is deeply intertwined with our survival, right? Humans, for us to be the humans that we are today, you could call it the king of the modern world. We've basically dominated survival. We've basically won the game of survival, right? Humans are very much on top of the food chain, and we're very much in control of our environment. And the reason for that is because we've been able to create these complex social domains where we have the same values, the same beliefs. We can communicate, we can create these complex structures where we work together for the most part, typically just for our tribe or for our clan, but that's slowly changing to a more global scale of humanity, but that's a different side note. So anyway, we've created this like deeply complex social world just so that we can survive, right? So socializing is not just a game. It's very much tied to our survival. It's very much tied to, do we fit into the tribe? And if you don't, you literally, in times past, that means death, right? That equals death. If you don't conform and you don't get along with other people and people don't like you, you literally are, you would be subject to death, right? Or at the very best, you would be subject to being kind of like low down the totem pole, and you wouldn't be getting any mating opportunities. You wouldn't be getting much resources. You wouldn't be getting much food. So socializing is very much not a game. It's very much survival, right? It is a game in the sense that it's illusory, but it's also very much not, because it's tied to our survival, right? And for the major part of humanity, even like 50 years ago, you might think like 50 years ago it's not survival. But really, like if you even go back like 100 years, like if you weren't fitting in and people didn't like you, that actually could literally mean you could die, right? Even in like the early 1900s and the late 1800s, like in a very, agricultural or like, stage blue kind of society, this could mean a very terrible life for you if you didn't fit in, right? And I remember even my grandmother told me that, when she was growing up, that most women, they didn't really even have a choice on like family and children. Like that was pretty much just like assumed, right? Like they pretty much had to fall into that role. And if they didn't, it was just very isolating and very weird, right? And fortunately now we live in a time where that's not the case. Like we can survive on our own, right? You can do Uber Eats, you can live in your own, you can still kind of connect to others through the internet if you want. You don't even really have to leave your house much these days if you have the means, right? So fortunately, we do live in a time where we don't have to be as dependent on other people. There's a lot more freedom within the genders. There's a lot more freedom within, how you can live your life and, the things you want to pursue and how you want to live. But we have to understand that this is very new. This is very recent, right? And for our genes, for our DNA, for our, you could call it our survival psyche, we've evolved for hundreds of thousands of years through these social structures, right? So that doesn't just go away overnight, right? We're still very much, our DNA still very much equates socializing to surviving, and still puts a great amount of importance on, how we show up socializing. Do we fit in? Are we conforming? Do people like us? These things, right? So in a very real sense, it's not a game, and it's very much still a very real thing for people today. And I really like the word survival here, because if we dig a little deeper, we can see on a level, what really is socializing, right? When you see a couple holding hands, or you see, two people grabbing coffee together, or you see, people sitting across from each other and kind of just chatting, right? Like, what actually is this, right? On some level, what actually is this? And if we dig a little deeper and we kind of question it, what we can see is this is actually monkeys picking lice from each other's hair, right? And I know that might seem like kind of a funny analogy, or maybe even insulting, but like, I mean this metaphorically, right? I mean this metaphorically because in the jungle, what monkeys do is they pick lice from each other's hair to form alliances, right? It's to form a social bond. It's to kind of say in a subtle way, like, hey, I've got you. We can pick fruit together. I'll share food with you. I'll share resources with you. This will increase your standing in the hierarchy so that you can find a mate. We're together. I've got your back. I'll make sure they don't kick you out. I'll make sure you're taken care of if you make sure I'm taken care of. Basically, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, right? And we see this with humans in a little bit of a more complex way, but it's still the same foundational, metaphorical lice picking from each other's hair, right? This might be, agreeing on political views. This might be gossiping together. This might be complaining together. This might be, sharing some vulnerable viewpoint and then having someone else validate that for you and say, no, you're not crazy. It's okay. And then, so what's happening here is basically, this is a very complex and advanced form of grooming. It's an advanced form of, picking lice from each other's hair. And I know this sounds maybe kind of insulting to people, and insulting to the social domain. And I want to reiterate that I think socializing is very beautiful. I think that our ability to connect and communicate is absolutely incredible. And it's brought forth things like philosophy and art and music and politics and all these, incredible advancements that only really humans can do because of our complex social domain, right? And without it, we would just be probably extinct, but maybe we'd just be like, 50,000 people left in the world and like dwelling in some cave somewhere, picking scraps off the ground, right? So we have this rich experience of life because of socializing, and I love people. There's so much beauty in talking to people, seeing their perspective. There's so much beauty in humans, right? And so I don't want this to sound anti-people or anti-social. I just want us to get a grasp on what socializing really is and how it comes from this place of survival for the most part, right? That's not everything. The monkey grooming is not everything, but that is an aspect of it, right? That is where we come from, and we might as well, embrace it. And it's here that I'd like to introduce two different types of socializing, right? So the first one is what we just talked about. That's the survival socializing, right? That is I pick your lice, you pick mine. You give me a sense of safety, I give you a sense of validation, right? You provide this illusion of, security and belonging and connection, and I'll provide you with, the same, right? So it's this very like tit for tat, I got your back, you got mine kind of like socializing, right? Where we're getting a sense of, comfort and safety from each other that we can't find within ourselves, right? Or that validation that we can't find within ourselves, or that satisfaction, or whatever the millions of things people interact and socialize for, these deep needs, right? And then there's another form of socializing that I want to call whole socializing, right? And this is much rarer. This is a much less seen form of socializing. But whole socializing is where you're coming from a place of wholeness, right? Maybe the other person is, maybe the other person isn't. That doesn't really matter. But you are coming from a place of wholeness. You're coming from a place of overflow. You're okay in yourself. You're secure in yourself. You're able to generate all of those things that people search externally for within yourself. So whether that's love, whether that's validation, whether that's satisfaction, whether that's content, all of these things, you're able to generate them within yourself. So when you do go out and socialize, you're not coming from a place of need. You're just kind of doing it for the joy of itself. You just enjoy being around these people. They're fun, they're entertaining, they're cool, right? And you actually enjoy sharing ideas. You enjoy, sharing perspectives. You enjoy spending time with them, right? And this is a much healthier form of socializing. And a great example of this is that we can see it in romantic relationships, where we can really see this show up, right? So we've all had, or we all know, those relationships where it's very tit for tat, right? It's very like, you give me the intimacy, let's say. You give me the intimacy, I'll give you the resources, right? You give me the validation and the love and the nurturing, and I'll give you the attention and presence, and talk to you about your problems and complaints, and be there for you, and make you feel less lonely. And this can be very toxic, because what can happen is people can stay in abusive relationships, or just this kind of taking from each other, and then they're kind of like low-key, subtly keeping track of what the other one has done or is doing. And they stay in it because they are afraid of being alone, right? Or because they need those things that other person is giving them, whether that's the validation, the sense of security, the intimacy, these things, this connection feeling, right? So they outsource it to that person. They become dependent on them. And then you get these kind of like codependent relationships, which is a pretty vast majority of relationships, right? But when we're talking about coming from this whole socializing or this whole relationships, it can be two whole people who are okay in themselves, secure in themselves, but yeah, they like having a lover. They like having, that feminine energy around, or that masculine energy around, and they're okay with, dancing with that. But there's none of this like toxicity, this like neediness from each other, right? And so we want to get to like, how do we get to that? Because obviously that's ideal. You want to be in that place, right, of wholeness, socializing from wholeness and overflow. And I think, it's a spectrum. Like, I don't know if there's people that are completely like 100% need nothing from anyone else. There probably are, but it's a very low amount, right? And you want to be, it's like a spectrum. You want to be on the further end of it. You're more and more whole, right? And then there's people on the other end of the spectrum that are just completely like, they're a wreck without other people. They can't sit with themselves. They're dysfunctional without others. They have all kinds of bad habits and things. Their life is like completely out of order without other people, or their emotions are out of order without other people validating them and things like that. So we want to slowly move to the other end of the spectrum, right? And how do we do this? One of the key ways to do this is to find that within yourself, and to find it so deeply within yourself. And, it's embodied. It's not a mental thing. It's embodied. You're just like good in yourself, right? You are completely content in yourself. You really have like this wholeness in yourself. There's nothing else that needs to be added to make you feel better, to make you feel more whole. It's like a self-generated wholeness, which comes back to, in the introduction, when I was speaking about, when I saw the image of the Buddha, it was just this like deep attraction to that idea of like this centeredness and this wholeness in yourself, where nothing else is needed, right? And one of the ways we can do that is by going into solitude, by going into time alone with ourselves, being with ourselves, and becoming more and more okay with just being and just sitting, and kind of working through and moving through these programs, these deep, almost evolutionarily programs of, I need others, I'm alone, I'm lonely, like these feelings of loneliness, these feelings of, our mind, all the trauma, all the things that we haven't faced, all the things we need to work through coming up. And then in that solitude, sitting with them, working through them. And then as that dissolves more and more, we find more and more peace in that just beingness, that just sitting there, right? And this allows us to then go back into the world and interact and socialize from a place of, I'm good, I'm whole, I can actually love from this place. Like, I don't need anything from other people, right? And it just creates a much more healthy, enjoyable, real, authentic dynamic with other people. And here I'd like to introduce the concept of solitude and the beauty of solitude and the wellspring of gold that is solitude, right? And we can begin by, questioning, how often in society and how much in society are we kind of told to go into solitude and to spend time alone and to be with our thoughts and to just, how encouraged is that, right? Whether it's directly encouraged or kind of through programming and subtle hinting of socializing, it's very much not encouraged. Like I don't remember growing up and being told, go spend time alone with yourself, go sit with your thoughts alone. Like that was never really brought up. And as we'll dive in here, but the level of benefit that comes from solitude, it's almost like a human need. And the level of benefit that comes from it is very much not balanced out with how encouraged and how spoken about it is, right? And you can see that in today's world, especially in the West and in these Western cultures and Western society. Like you can see how afraid people are of being alone. And in fact, it's not only not encouraged, but we're told that it's unhealthy. We're told that it's weird. We're told that you're a loser. We're told that that's bad for you, right? That you need to socialize. We need people. We need friends. Like this is the biggest pillar of life. Like this is the most important thing in life is who you're connecting with and your friend circle and your social status. Like this is all survival. Like this, yes, it's important to some level, but it's not the core, the meat of life, right? But we treat it as that. And you can see that with the rise and the explosion of Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, podcasts, audiobooks, video game, like playing together, like forums, all of these things. It's all social, right? And these things exploded, right? And what they do is they keep us from that solitary. They keep us from that time with ourselves. Even if you go to a park or you go on the subway or if you just look around, very rarely do you see someone just sitting there quietly with their thoughts. They might have earpods in. They might have a book in their hands. They might have their phone usually in their hands playing Candy Crush or something like that, right? And this programming, this wiring of this like discomfort of being with ourselves. We're completely untrained on how to do this. We're completely uninformed on the importance of this, right? And if you look at it today, like people can't stand it. They hate it. It's like torture, right? It's one of the highest forms of torture in a prison is solitary confinement, right? It's one of the worst things a person can go through is to just sit alone and be with themselves, right? And I don't know if you guys heard about this, but there's a Harvard experiment. They did an experiment at Harvard where they, put some people into a room and they put like a little red button in the room, right? Something like this. And basically the people just had to sit in a chair, right? And so they were sitting in a chair alone with their thoughts and they saw the button and their curiosity took them. And so they'd press the button and then the button shocks them. It's not like a crazy shock. Like it's just, it just shocks their hand a little bit. And what they did is after like 10, 15 minutes of sitting alone with themselves is they started shocking themselves. Like they started to literally shock themselves because that was preferable to just sitting alone with their thoughts, right? The pain of shocking themselves was preferable to, just being and sitting alone with themselves, right? And that might seem funny and ridiculous and stupid, but if we look at ourselves, we're doing the same thing. It's not with a literal shock, but instead of sitting alone with ourselves and our thoughts, we're shocking ourselves with online content. We're shocking ourselves with rage bait. We're shocking ourselves with, intense adult content stimulation, right? We're shocking ourselves with WhatsApp and news tweets and, doom scrolling, all of this. It's shocking our nervous system. We're shocking ourselves. We're trying to feel that stimulation. We're trying to feel awake. And so all of this really ties into how deeply we avoid being alone and we avoid solitude. But what if we challenge that? What if we question the idea that solitude is somehow unhealthy or bad, and we actually flip it and we consider that solitude may be where some of our greatest joys live, where some of our greatest creativity and insights and authenticity and wholeness and satisfaction in life live, right? And we can see this in different cultures. We can see in Tibet, right, that solitude is very much a core pillar of that culture. It's seen as it's a need, right? It's a need to have time in solitude, to have time in yourself, to contemplate and meditate and think. And this is seen as an essential part of growing and developing and becoming closer to God or reality or truth, or whatever you want to call it. And that we in the West have completely cut off this very much needed part of life, right? Like socializing is a need for sure, but solitude is also equally as much a need, right? So we're only eating half the cake. And honestly, we're gorging on that half. We're eating too much of that half, and we're leaving this other half completely left alone, right? And it's like a necessary part of life. Like, we really have to see solitude as a need, as a nourishment, almost as like food, right? It's like we need this time alone to integrate, to process life, to have insights, to think about what we want to do, to connect to our authentic, unique being, right? And to learn about ourselves and to know ourselves more, right? And to love ourselves more. And this really, all of this happens in solitude. A lot of this doesn't happen when you're around people. It's hard to get into that state of, creativity and insight when you're distracted by, the social world and the social domain. And a great example of this is Newton. Isaac Newton was, he was at Cambridge, and I believe the plague hit. And so he had to leave the university. And it was when he was out in solitude, because this was during the plague, so he was basically alone, I believe on his parents' ranch or something like that. And it was when he was there that he was just, sitting under the tree, and the insight of gravity came to him, right? It didn't happen in the university. It didn't happen in the conference room. It didn't happen in, the board where people were. It happens when his mind was open and he was alone, and he was allowed to kind of let the contraction of this illusory self, of having to be a person, of having to have a personality, of having to be an ego that comes with socializing, right? Because that is a contraction. When we go and socialize, we have to put that mask on, right? And that takes energy, and that takes mental power, right? And so when we're in solitude, all of that opens up, and the mind relaxes, and the mind opens, and it can begin to kind of wander and think about other things. And this is the birth of genius. This is the birth of creativity. This is the birth of life purpose and awakening and all of these beautiful things, right? We see that with Jesus. He spent 40 days and nights in the desert, right? He spent that time in solitude and had huge awakenings that he came back and brought to the world, right? We see that with Ramana Maharshi, who spent 15 years in a cave after his major awakening so that he could just process and integrate and, embody all of that, right? So solitude is literally the fertile ground for growth. Solitude is literally the arena for, genius, right? It's the arena for insight. And it doesn't happen. It rarely happens. And you can do this with so many people. Einstein, you can do this with so many, Da Vinci, Tesla, right? You can do this with so many genius minds. And very few of them, if any, had their major breakthroughs, awakenings, insights, creations while being surrounded by people or while navigating and managing the social domain, right? So we really need to emphasize the importance of solitude and not put it on the back burner as this kind of luxury thing, but really see it as a need. And there's good reason that different artists, philosophers, musicians, writers, thinkers all spend a lot of time in solitude, especially when they're working on a project, right? There's a certain momentum that happens in that solitude. There's a certain ability to tap into deeper layers of our minds that happens in that solitude, right? There's countless examples, whether it's, Socrates, Aristotle, Friedrich Nietzsche, or Queen. They went as a band, but they went out into that ranch and, created that incredible music together. So there's really an acknowledgement here of this like natural pull towards solitude when our souls are wanting to create something, when we're wanting to figure something out, when we're wanting to heal something or work through something. There's this like medicine and this inspiration that comes from solitude that we've seen, across human time. And this is a bit of a side note, but I think it's important, is to realize the dangers of socializing, right? We're told that socializing is healthy. It's something that we need to do. It's something that's super important. And that is true, especially at a young age. We need to, fit in and have friends. And I think that when you're younger, it can be very unhealthy and traumatizing, actually, to not socialize, to not have people around, right? But we need to look at this as like food, right? Because food is a need as well. And you can eat McDonald's and chips and candy, or you can eat, healthy, organic, natural foods, right? So what kind of socializing are you doing? Like who are the people you're around? What influence do they have on you? What are their beliefs and values? And are they nourishing, or are they kind of like fast food, right? And so that's very important to consider, is that, socialization can also be a dangerous thing, right? And I think growing up, as I said earlier, you kind of have to conform to the people around you to fit in. Like, you kind of have to do that, or else you won't get your social needs met, right? And the problem there is that once that's done, when you want to keep going and evolving and growing, it's like crabs in a bucket. Like, the people around you are going to start pulling you down. Like, what, you want to meditate? You don't want to drink with me? You don't want to, smoke and chase girls and do this stuff? Like, they'll start pulling you back down as you try to go to higher levels of development. And if you don't have people around you that are also helping you grow and evolve, then you'll kind of just get sucked down back into those levels, right? And there's so many, obvious examples of this. Like gang members, right? Like, if you're in a rough area of the world and you're surrounded by gang members and your cousins are in gangs and your brothers and sisters are in jail and this stuff, then to fit in, to socialize, you'll have to go to that, if we're talking about spiral dynamics, stage red level of development. So you might join a gang because that's how you fit in and socialize, and then you end up, killing someone or something like that, and then you go to jail for the rest of your life. That's how socializing can be dangerous, right? Or maybe you grow up in like a Christian family, right? And so to fit in, you have to adopt the views of your family. Like, so you carry the Bible, you believe in all this dogma, this religious dogma, you take on Christianity, and then you stay with that until you're 80. So you spend your whole life in this paradigm of Christianity, this kind of stage blue level of development in spiral dynamics, where you are kind of dogmatic about things. You don't really explore your sensuality. You, think people are going to go to hell, and you kind of live in fear of God. And that's how socializing can be dangerous, right? So it's in a way, it's good because people can bring you up to a certain level of development, right? If we were just on our own, then we would all be just like little Tarzans running around. Like, we wouldn't get to higher levels of development. We wouldn't even get to stage red by ourselves, right? So it's good that people are around because they bring you up to that level. But once you hit the center of gravity of the people around you, they tend to try to keep you there, right? And so it can be very difficult to try to grow and evolve yourself past that level, right? And you might, look at this and scoff and say, okay, well, my friends aren't dogmatic fundamentalist religion people, and they're also not gangsters, so I think I'm doing pretty good. And that's probably true, but as we go higher and higher into levels of development, you have to look for more subtleties, right? So what are the subtle ways that the people around you might be holding you into lower, not allowing you to fully develop, right? And maybe that's more stage green. Maybe the people around you are, too much obsessed with politics and activism and the environment to where, it's a distraction. It's like you're not able to work on yourself and meditate and do these things and grow yourself because so much time and energy is being poured into, fighting the evil in the world and activism and protesting in these things. And I'm not saying that's not important. I think we should definitely, work to make the world a better place, but you can get kind of radical about it. And if your friends are radical about it, they'll suck you into that too. So it's good to be aware of this and to notice, who's around you and how they're influencing you. And if it's allowing you to grow and develop, right? Or if it's keeping you in arrested development. And I think it's actually better to be alone than to be around with people who are dragging you down, right? And there are times in life where you're in between phases, right? And you're kind of growing out of old skin. And there's this like transition phase where you're trying to meet the new people who are kind of who you can socialize, who are kind of sharing the same values and into the same things as you, right? And so there's like this kind of painful shedding of the skin where you do have to spend some time alone. Like sometimes the universe just says, okay, this is a period of solitude for you, right? And what's important there is to not fall back into old ways of comfort, old ways of fitting in, and old ways of socializing, and to actually embrace that time and to just be alone and to work on yourself, to think, to write, to journal. And then eventually those people will come around and you'll find ways to meet them. You'll start going to different social events. Maybe instead of going to a bar, you go to ecstatic dance, right? Or you go to a yoga thing, or you go to some, outdoor festival where you start meeting more people aligned with your values. And it's not that you need to be afraid of the party people and you need to be afraid of the Christians and things like that. I don't think fear is ever the answer. I think it's like you can embrace them in your heart. You can socialize. You can be friends with them. You can hang around them and things. But they shouldn't be like your core foundation of human connection and socializing, right? It's almost like you can kind of love them from a distance, is the way I like to put it, right? And also just, yeah, embracing those times of maybe you don't have a lot of friends around right now, or maybe you're trying to meet new people or these things. And it's kind of just like going into that solitude and embracing it and enjoying it as well. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening. And if I could boil this video down to one key point, it's that solitude is the fertile ground for where your deepest levels of healing, insight, creativity, genius, self-connection, authenticity, self-honesty, awakening, all of that is the fertile ground of that is solitude, right? Solitude is where all of these things lay, where all of these things are born, right? And if you're going to be walking this path of development and self-actualization and awakening and, becoming great, you're going to have to face solitude. You're going to have to just face that solitude is an integral and necessary part of that path, and you're not going to get there without it, right? You need to embrace solitude. And if you're not used to spending a lot of time in true solitude, and I mean true solitude, I don't mean you're playing music in the background, you've got your books, or you sit for 30 minutes, and I mean real solitude, right? Really being with yourself and moving through all of the things that come up. It's going to be uncomfortable at times. It's going to be cold at times. It's going to feel lonely at times. And my advice is to sit into that loneliness, is to sit into that bitterness, right? It's almost like taking an ice bath, right? You allow the pain of the ice bath to you relax into it, right? It's like it hurts in the moment, but it's good for you. And you just kind of relax and rest into that bitterness and that coldness, right? And I also want to make the caveat of like healthy isolation versus like solitude, right? Because if you're just sitting around and you're spiraling into negative loops and you're, feeling lonely and you're distracting yourself with the phone and the stuff, that's not solitude, right? I mean, solitude like a meditation, like a nourishment, being in nature and just sitting there in silence with your thoughts in a peaceful way, right? And walking the path of development, you're naturally going to isolate yourself. As I mentioned, you're naturally going to become different from the norm, become different from the herd. That's part of this work, right? It'll be more and more difficult to kind of fit in and connect with people on a certain level, because you'll be kind of moving past the norms, values, and the norms and the crowds, the cultural beliefs and the cultural collective mind, right? So that's also part of this path, right? But don't pretzel yourself. Do not pretzel yourself to fit in. Do not give away your authentic truth just to fit in with other people. And that's where the power of solitude comes in. If you're okay with being alone, then you're totally free. You're powerful. You don't have to pretzel yourself to get your social needs met, right? So do your own thing if you have to. Do your own thing. If that's what's authentic to you is to do your own thing, then do your own thing. And really the deepest, most satisfying insights you're going to have, the most beautiful moments in life that you're going to have, at least in my opinion, some of the most beautiful moments of my life have been in solitude. The deepest realizations I've had, the deepest insights, the most beautiful moments have been in moments where I'm just alone with myself and just reflecting on life and integrating life and just being, just basking in that beingness that you truly are, right? So thanks for sitting through this. If you got through the whole video, I salute you. And thank you for being here today. Sending you lots of love, and talk soon. Cheers.